welcome back to History's Agenda. Tonight, we're going to dig deep into the recent release and other things, investigations regarding UFOs. As you know, and you've seen some pictures on the intro, these photographs were released by multiple agencies in the United States government by order of the president. Some of these photos come from the Department of Defense, some from NASA, some from the Pentagon. So it's an interesting time for researchers regarding UFOs, and I know they call them something else today, but I like to stick to the original. So this is part one of my conversation with Dr. Simeon Hein regarding this topic. And you know Dr. Hein. He's been with us before. He talked to us. He's all over YouTube. He talks about various topics. He was the first one that spoke to us about remote viewing. As you know, we've done a few podcasts about that. He spoke to us about, he's a tireless investigator into Bigfoot and UFOs. So without further ado, my conversation with Dr. Hein. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to History's Agenda. Today we have a special guest with us again, somebody you know if you've been watching our podcast, Dr. Simeon Hein, who has talked to us about many different topics, and today we're going to talk about UFOs, which is the topic of the day right now. We have all these released by the government showing us the videos. I don't want to say, but I'm going to say it, what they want us to see, you know, with lack of context and lack of explanation. But anyway, Dr. Hein, welcome back.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me here again today.
So I know we've talked about UFOs in the past, and just about, you know, how long have you been looking at this issue? I know I just heard you tell a story from when you were a kid. I'm going to tell you one when I was a kid. Kind of similar story. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I've been mentioning recently in some of my interviews, I mean, I had a sighting with my mom up in the Everglades in Florida in the 70s, which almost feels like prehistory at this point. A long time ago. Yeah, we're talking like 50 years ago. And I think I was 12, and we saw something. You know, she was a bird watcher, and she loved, you know, bird watching in Westchester County. There's so many areas to see good birds along Long Island Sound. We would go all over the area to Rye and Connecticut. She took us down, just myself, not my brother or dad, to go see bird watching. We were out there in the swamps of Everglades National Park, and it's a big park, Steve, if you've ever been down there. And there was no one else around. All you're seeing are swamps and plains for as far as I can see. I don't think I'd ever seen anything quite like it. I was only like 12.
It's a horror picture waiting to happen.
Could be. It was, you're by yourself out there. I mean, it was, I just remember the beauty of it, Steve. This vast area. It was very different than the metropolitan New York area, you know? Right. And in the 70s back then, and just vast. And my mom was fearless. She would take us hiking anywhere. She called it trailitis. You saw a trail, you got to keep going a little farther down the trail. I think I inherited her trailitis.
There's something to that.
Yeah. And so she taught me to really appreciate nature. Steve, she taught me to observe, to look with your eyes. Don't take things for granted. Look at what's around you. She would go to the schools around Greenberg, and she would give nature walks. She came to our school once when we were in kindergarten, and one of my classmates still remembers when she took us out and took us on a nature walk. So my mom was really good at observing all levels of nature. So imagine we're out there and there's something that appears overhead that in my, you know, young mind said, what could that be? It looks like the moon. But the moon was on the horizon, and she saw it out there, and she said, you know, what, you know, big deal moon. I said, no, Mom, it's up, look at the moon up there. I said, and she said, and she pointed her binoculars. She goes, Sim, it's a UFO. Anyway, she was really paying attention. I mean, this is from someone that had been looking at birds for decades and
Right.
plants and all this stuff and all these big objects right above us. And Steve, it was partly amorphous. It's hard to make sense of what it was. To this day, I can't understand what we saw. It looked cloud-like and blurry, but at the same time, with binoculars, it looked like it had structure. And it moved instantly as soon as we started to look at it, which is really strange. I mean, you're thinking, did it see us? I mean, why is it? And it moved into a cloud as we put our binoculars on it. But I still remember looking up and there was a pattern of dots underneath that really made it look technological at the
Huh.
same time. So
And that brings the curiosity. I had a similar thing with my mother, believe it or not, that she used to look out the window for my dad to come home from his second job. He worked a
yeah,
job in the day back then. I was really little, and he worked a night job too. And in the wintertime, from our top looking out in front of our house, it was up high. You could see miles away car lights as they got off the highway. And it was pretty, people didn't drive at night. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere where we lived in New Jersey. And one night she's laying in bed waiting for him to come home. And I walk into her room and she goes, "What's that?" She points out the window. I go over to the window and there's it looks like a fireball in the sky traveling across the sky. And I'm like, "Mom, I don't know what that is, but it doesn't make sense." I mean, whatever. All of a sudden, gone. You see a couple of plane lights around it, gone. Now, back then, not far with and I heard you talk about this too, there were a Nike missile base up on the hill. I'm old, so there were Nike missiles, and they weren't that far away, and so that area to fly around wasn't too easy to happen. So you
right.
see the fireball, and then it disappears, and now there's planes everywhere. So you say to yourself, my mother even called the police and said, "Listen, I saw this in the sky." And for my mother, who was like, wouldn't do anything, that was quite a thing. She was very taken back by it. So,
What
and
year
that,
was that? Was that 60s?
yeah, 68, maybe 67.
So Steve, I got to mention one more case like that. I don't know if you were familiar with this one. This was something I learned about from Dominic, who we
Right?
both know, who's been on your show. This involved our wrestling coach. Do you know this story? It's Coach Vinny
No.
from Edgemont. This is a very important story, Steve. In 1979, the wrestling team saw a black triangular craft 1,000 feet over Mamaroneck High School on a Saturday at the end of the year. It could have been like end of December, January 1st, 1979. The guy's name was Vinny. I've interviewed him on my channel twice, my YouTube channel. I didn't hear about this case until Dominic found out about it around 2020, so just about 6 years ago. That's how long it takes for these things to come out. This is 40 years. The wrestling coach and about 5 or 6 of our classmates in the would have been the 10th or 11th grade saw a black triangular object hovering over Mamaroneck High School. Vinny's put it at about, I think he said 1,000 feet up. And it was enough that he called the police in Mamaroneck, and they said, "We're getting other calls about it right now." And they said there's a blackout in the neighboring towns right around Mamaroneck right at this moment that's coinciding with the object. And
Wow.
then to make it even more interesting, Vinny said that jets, Vietnam era jets came out of the direction of Connecticut and the object shot off at, again, instantaneous velocity in the direction of New York, New Jersey as the jets approached. And I re-listened to the interview recently, Steve, because it's very challenging to get all the details the first time because of the
Sure.
sort of the shock effect of seeing something that no one ever told you was real, right? So he described little lights along the edges and then it just shoots off at an instantaneous speed, and the jets never catch up to it. That's when he called the police. They said, "We got other calls." Now, Dominic did more research about this and uncovered he went, I believe, to the Greenberg Library.
Wow.
Yeah, and he over, in the Elmsford area, he
Sure.
went to the library. Yep, and
It's
he
a
found.
huge library, by the way.
Yeah,
It's
I grew up in that
gigantic.
library.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in that library. Mom brought us over to that library all the time.
And an architectural marvel too.
Beautiful and great, just a wonderful community library if there is one, right? He used the microfiche system recently and found the articles. One was in the Reporter Dispatch, which I used to deliver as a high school kid, and another newspaper. And he found the articles corroborating Vinny's story. Isn't that something? And I can
Yeah.
send you the links to the interview. I did 2 interviews with Vinny about this.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So you have police corroboration, you have newspaper articles who also talk to the police about this. So, Steve, the interesting thing that Dominic and I talked about this is several years before the Hudson Valley Triangle is making its big appearances up and down the Hudson, Taconic Parkway, that whole area, right? In the 80s, that started to be a bigger thing, and there were sightings where huge numbers of cars would stop along the highways there and see this. I spoke to someone who was a friend of my mom's who saw it coming back down the Taconic one time around. You remembered it was around Christmas time. They were coming back from
Right?
skiing, and he said it was sort of over Westchester Airport. But the weird thing about it, he said, it made what we now call a flat turn. It just rotated and turned like a plane. So, I mean, a lot of people saw this. I even remember someone telling me one more thing about the area that, I grew up in where you live is that I was at a high school reunion a couple of years ago, and the gym coach told me, people said, "Simeon, what do you do nowadays?" I told them about my study of these types of subjects, UFOs and related subjects. And the gym coach, who I remembered, who was our gym coach, said I had a sighting of an object over 287, not far from the Elmsford Library. That area, he said, I pulled over. It was so startling. It was an object hovering over 287. There were other motorists looking. So going back to what you're saying, Steve, is how much of this people are seeing, but they're not reporting because there's no good reporting system. They're not aware of it. As speaking as a sociologist, there's ostracism and ridicule that witnesses receive. So there's no real benefit for them to talk about this, right? And they forget about it. And here, I bring it up at a high school reunion just a couple of years ago, and
Wow.
we find this story from Coach Vinny, the wrestling coach. And then a friend of my mom says, I saw that object, the triangular. We called the police again. You just wonder, is this, in sociology, Steve, we call these hidden events. These are things that people are experiencing, but they're not reporting because they don't see any benefit or they're afraid to talk about it.
There's no way to verify it. You know what I mean? That's what you got to think about. Just a regular thing. You saw somebody breaking into somebody's house. Unless you know who that person is or that person's house gets reported, you're not going to say it because everybody's just going to make you look stupid, right? Because
Right.
they control the information for whatever reason, political, personal, ego, for whatever reason. I think that's a common thing. I also remember something that I was told by a United States Air Force officer who was pretty high in a security level. I mean, there were no dates or anything, but he flew F-117s before the Gulf War. He flew in the Gulf War, and that's how everything became declassified about them, and that's how the conversation came up. That they would take the F-117s and fly into Canada without any warning to the government, without any warning to the military and just do it. And then they used to say, and then they would say, let's see how they react. Let's see if we get detected. Let's see how they react. Why? Who knows? They probably thought that was some kind of strategic advantage, maybe the military, or maybe they were just looking to have a good time. Here we got these things, we got to fly around here. We might as well start using them. Who knows? But you think of that. I mean, are there things out there that the military are using that they're not telling us about, or is there somebody else that's using these things to test out how they react? They want to learn about us. Think about it in reverse. Think about they're out from another planet and they're coming here. I mean, are they telling their people that we found another planet and we're investigating it? Just like our government's not telling us about other people coming here. I mean, so it's like one of those movies where there's a top secret thing and nobody knows about it. So because nobody told anybody, who knows? We know what the answer to that question is, but we all know that through recent events now they're releasing these old videos and things. Listen, everybody's scratching their head. Maybe the government knows more. Maybe they don't. Maybe they have other pieces to the puzzle. Maybe a lot of things. So I know you know a lot more about it. I know that you were just at a rather large conference regarding
Yeah,
UFOs, and I know there's all different terms for it, but I think UFO is the easiest one to say.
me too.
And I know you were a speaker there, and I know there were a lot of people that have been investigating this for many years that are so-called qualified to speak on this subject. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Right. Steve, I've been going to these types of UFO conferences since 1997. That's when I learned about remote viewing back in 1996. And there were people who came to learn remote viewing. It was in Atlanta at the Farsight Institute. There were people that showed up there for classes that were like the types of people you're talking about who had the inside information. And they knew something about remote viewing, but because it had been a special access program, they wanted to find out more. What is this all about? And these were people from NASA, people that had worked with NASA, people in the space shuttle program, and so forth. I got curious again in the subject because, as I mentioned, I had that sighting as a kid, but I hadn't really pursued the subject very much. I mean, it's not like going through academia, there were a lot of places to have any contact with the subject matter. It simply wasn't discussed, even at the University of Arizona, where I went, big astrophysics program, a lot of public lectures the public could go to about astronomy, astrophysics, fascinating stuff. No one ever mentioned anything remotely like what we're talking about. But I did start going to conferences, and I have encountered a lot of witnesses over the decades with very similar types of experiences, either personally or with the extent to which the government wants to cover up the subject. So from a couple different angles, it's always very interesting. It's interesting to hear from people who've experienced something, who've had a sight or some other close encounter. And then it's very interesting to talk to people who are retired from the military who want to tell you what they saw, people that worked at these different Air Force bases and so forth. And Steve, I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of witnesses out there. We haven't even begun to hear just the 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 most of it. I mean, we're getting the tip of the iceberg here. These videos that they're releasing, some people call them disclosure dots, because that's all you see on the screen is a dot moving
Right.
around. And I don't know what that is, and nobody knows what that is without context. They're not telling us very much about when it was filmed, what did the pilots experience at the time? Did they have any psychic effects in the cockpit? Did they see anything happening electromagnetically to their instruments? And Jacques Vallée, the famous UFO researcher who was J. Allen Hynek's research assistant and is featured, I think he had a cameo appearance in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Right.
And now we have a new Spielberg movie, which I just saw yesterday, which gets into these issues, Steve. I don't know if you've seen that film, but
I saw it on Saturday.
this is exactly what it's about. How many layers are there? Spielberg's movie is fictional, but he put real, actual events in UFO history into the film, which I know. I mean, someone did their research there because these are real crashes or encounters. I especially appreciated him putting the Nixon Gleason event in Homestead Air Force Base in there, which you've probably heard about. But Jacques Vallée at the conference, Contact in the Desert, made a very good point. I think you can agree with this, Steve. Without any context, those videos don't really tell us very much. You need to have layers of research around a sighting. Interviews with witnesses. Who filmed that? What did they see? If you just release these videos without any context, it doesn't really tell us very much. Now, it's better than nothing, and it tells us that the government is saying to us, finally, in my interpretation, we really don't know what these are, and we're going to show them to you because our president has this directive to create transparency with regard to the UFO phenomena. So we're releasing something, we don't know what it is, and we just want to show it to you, the public. And at least they're not laughing at it anymore, and they're not ridiculing witnesses, and they're not putting them into mental institutions like they did to some of the Roswell witnesses and reporters and people in the town who wanted to talk about it. They're not using the control methods of the past to silence witnesses. They're actually saying, we don't know what these are. Maybe you can figure it out. So I think that's a step forward. But I think the Spielberg movie, Disclosure Day, shows us how much farther we have to go. There is 79 years of history, roughly, around this topic, thousands and thousands of witnesses. I've talked to many of these witnesses, and it's a big story, and we're really just scratching the surface by releasing a few documents.
Right. So on this podcast, we talk about these things that we have to kind of figure out ourselves from the government. But as I watched this movie, or Close Encounters is another one that he did a great job with going through and talking about things. But this one definitely relates to some more facts than we know, and it kind of leaves you hanging at the end. Though
Yeah.
it did remind me of a Twilight Zone episode. I was waiting for her to say it's a cookbook when she came to the microphone, but just as a joke, it would have been good. But I, I kind of look at it like this. So when you have a child, and that's the way the government thinks of the masses, the demos, the democracy, the rabble of the world, what do? Well, you don't say, here's how you figure out the world. You say, okay, I'm going to teach you addition. 2 plus 2 is 4. Now I'm going to teach you multiplication. Year later, 2 years later. Now I'm going to teach you division, and I'm going to teach you algebra and calculus. I was a physics major originally. And now we're going to teach, I was going to try to be an astronomer. That died a quick death. And on and on and on. And now you have all the information, you could figure out the answer to some questions, or at least you could figure out the right questions. And I think the government does that to us. I truly believe, and everyone's going to think I'm crazy, you may not, that in some ways the government uses these directors to make movies to kind of like prep us for these issues.
Yeah. Steve, there's actually some evidence for that. I heard a lecture about Hollywood making UFO movies over the decades, and there are people from the military that come to the studio and tell you what you're allowed to show and what you're not allowed to show. And the carrot is if you cooperate with them, they're going to give you resources to help make the movie, some extra tanks and jeeps and things like this. But there have been stories over the years of very mysterious people that showed up at the movie studios and got in contact with the directors and influenced the film. So that could be what is going on. But there's another side to it, which I think Disclosure Day brings out to me as a remote viewing instructor, someone who's been involved with the subject. There could be influence from the other side on our ability to talk about this subject. And I think that's revealed, pretty strongly in Emily Blunt's character in the film, right? Which is that, and people have said this for a long time, Steve, there's a third party here, which is the visitors, whoever and wherever they're from. I don't know exactly where they're from. That's a big topic. It will take us weeks to go through that. But
You would think they could be from many places.
they could be from it. Steve, the answer to your question is it could be all of the above because our minds like things to be simple, but we know it's a big universe. It's a really big universe. And there could be the answer could be A, B, E, all of the above in our multiple choice test here because they could, whoever they are, if we accept that and I think that's what this release, we had the third release last Friday of documents under this Trump initiative. I'm not sure if it's a signed formal executive order, but people are taking it seriously in Washington. There was even a Fortune 500 company that came forward with their documents. Was it Dow? On Friday said, we're releasing what we have, if they are, that there isn't this other intelligence. People have different beliefs on what it is, whatever this is that shows us these objects that we see, the flying saucers, the flying discs, the black triangles, the sentient orbs, which came up at the press conference last week when David Grush, remember, reporter asked him, you saw that, Steve, right? He said,
Yeah.
how many types of ETs is the U.S. government aware of? That really shocked me to hear that an answer to that question without giggles, because we've had that question come up many times in presidential, when the press secretaries are answering questions and they just kind of giggle about it. And David Grush, I mean, doesn't work for the executive branch. As a former Air Force official, he said, well, there's several. I actually heard it as the word seven, but I listened to it again. I had the mic I was listening to said several, from corporeal bipeds to sentient plasmas. And this is someone that used to brief the president of the United States, worked for National Geospatial Agency, NGO, and National Reconnaissance Office, Steve, which is you might be aware, it was even illegal a couple decades ago to even mention their existence. Yes, federal officials who knew about this organization could be charged even for mentioning their name. He worked for an NGA and NRO, briefed presidents, and he's telling us there are several species. You got to multiply that probably by 100 at least, or 1,000, because as you're saying, they start out with the addition and then subtraction, and next year you get to multi. Yeah, that's how it starts. So I think there's multiple layers here of information, and on one level, it's our own government releasing something, and we know that our president likes to be the center of attention all the time. It's this sort of narcissistic streak. But that could really serve this disclosure process because nothing is going to get attention like this subject. And I think that this is something that's going to be with us now for into the foreseeable future. Is this subject has been opened up. It's been shown to be real by the release of these videos and
Right.
by statements. David Grush could not say those things if he didn't have permission. He's already said he's signed NDAs. He can't show us where the craft is. He can only talk to Congress in those SCIFs, those secure informational facilities, where classified programs are talking.
Yeah,
So
they
I
have
think,
no problem arresting you and putting you in a dark room for the rest of your life. There's lots of them hidden all over the place.
no. And Steve, I've talked to 4 people that have this level of information. One of them I put in my book, Black Swan Ghosts, Phil. who worked for an aerospace company. He's the only one that allowed me to use his name, who said, "I don't care anymore. I don't care what they're gonna do. I'm just gonna tell you what I know without revealing anything that could be too specific." And he
Right.
said that NASA has a black budget side that looks at crash retrieved materials and sends them off to, he said, to what I used to work for, an aerospace contractor. And the groups of us would assemble over these pieces. This is what it looks like in reality, and try to determine how they worked. And each group gets a separate component of the craft. This is according to Phil Catalano, and he's public about this. And he said, "I don't care anymore." He's the only one who's gone that far to say to me, "I'm just going to tell the truth without mentioning anything that could damage national security." He wouldn't tell me who he worked for, but he said that's how it works in the US. The government parcels out pieces of these craft to aerospace companies, then teams of those people, without necessarily knowing about the other team, are set work on just one component. And you know what all the people I've spoken to who've been involved in these programs tell me? They can't figure out how it works. I know we hear rumors that they reverse engineered it. I'm told by people who've actually handled these materials that it's too far advanced and they haven't made very much progress. Maybe they've made some. Maybe, like we're told, like the leading edge of the B-2 bomber has those electrostatic charges to give it
Right.
additional lift. Okay, those sort of electrostatic types of properties of the electromagnetic field have been known about since Maxwell in the 1880s. So this is not like new information, but we're talking about
Right.
really new stuff. I've spoken to these people, Steve. I'm just saying this because you know what they all tell me at the end, besides Phil, he was the only one. I'll get to the point in my conversation with them, and it'd be like you getting information from a witness. They're going to clam up at some point because they're afraid of the consequences of saying anything more to you. And I'm sure you've
Right.
seen this in person. This is what I get with these people, and I don't have the legal authority that you might have as a judge or in other legal capacity to get people
Right.
to testify. They will say just what you said, literally what you said. They said, "I signed an," I mean, they'll be talking to me, and it's great. I'm saying, "Wow." And you hit a wall, and they'll say, "I signed an NDA with the federal government. If I tell you any more, they could sue me back to the Stone Ages. If I hid in the deepest depths of Siberia, they would find me." This is literally what one witness told me. So that is a pretty high level of potential, punishment, like you're saying. If they have signed NDAs, David Grush has signed NDAs. So that's what we're up against. Is
That's
people
what
that
I
want to
mean.
talk and they're afraid. They're afraid.
But I mean, throughout time when we've had top secrets, even when we talk about the Manhattan Project, the thought was always to split the parts up so nobody themselves would know how to build the bomb.
Right.
So I mean, which was a waste of time. Obviously, they realized, and the best way to do it was, if speed is of the essence, that everybody's in one place, and then they can use each other's brain. But it's hard. It's hard to keep a secret. And you know what? Everybody says if you want to, you, you don't want to keep a secret, tell somebody in the government. Well, you know what? Some things they're really good at
No, they
because
are good at it.
they have made the public think that people that talk out are crazy. And they've done a good job at that misinformation. Listen, they do it during fighting world wars, right?
They do.
That's the thing they're great at. Of course, when there's people that release massive amounts of documents about what's going on, you want to talk about the Pentagon Papers. I mean, I don't think you could ever get anybody to believe that the presidents of the United States and everyone that was involved in the Vietnam War, that they didn't think they could win and had known that since Truman. And to think that, I don't think the American public would believe it, even if it was true. If it wasn't in black and white about what people knew and what they didn't know in the Pentagon Papers. So it's a similar kind of kind of thing. They've done such a great job with the American public that they can't really believe the truth sometimes.
They have, and I just saw, in that vein, I just saw a lecture by Don Schmidt, who's a Roswell investigator, and I mean, he wrote a lot of books. Like, just happen to have one here. These types of books about Roswell, children of Roswell, the witnesses to Roswell. I
Right.
think they're turning one of his books into a movie or a screenplay right now. He talked about it. I even just hearing him at Colorado MUFON last weekend, Steve, I was shocked to hear how much intimidation was applied to these witnesses by the U.S. Army. And there had been a very good relationship post World War II between the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell and the town because everyone, we had won World War II, and that was the 509th Bomb Group was the unit that created the bombs and delivered the bombs to Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
This was one of the top bases in the U.S. in terms of the quality of the personnel who worked there. Don said that even the floor sweeper would have had to have been the best floor sweeper in the U.S. military to work there. And yet, the people who saw what they saw in Roswell, whatever happened in early July 1947, I mean, the military came around there and threatened them, and they threatened children. And they used most heavy-handed approach. I mean, I had forgotten this. They took the rancher that found the wreckage, Mac Burzell, at the Foster Ranch, this huge 75,000 acre ranch. I forgot that he had been held without food and water for 5 days on the base
Wow.
until he recanted his story, and they marched him around the town when he and he went to everyone and said, "I just saw a weather balloon. I was wrong." They marched him around, and people were committed to mental institutions, not because anything was wrong with them, because they wanted to discredit them and just make them look kooky. So you can use what people are forgetting who think secrets can't be kept is you can intimidate witnesses to the point where they're going to be really afraid to talk about it. It's going to change their memories of the events, especially
Absolutely.
children. You go into children and say, if you ever say anything about what you saw, some of the kids had seen pieces because their dads were firefighters or something, brought in pieces of the memory metal. If you ever say anything about this, we're going to take you out to the desert and your whole family and your bodies will never be found. Can you imagine saying that to 10-year-olds? I mean, you could almost say it's like a war crime because the US military doesn't have authority over US civilians under ordinary peacetime circumstances, without some sort of declaration of martial law. So
Uh,
you can keep these secrets just by threatening witnesses.
It's also that at that time, the premise was unbelievable, that there was a spaceship coming, unless you were watching science fiction movies. It's funny when you talked about the pressure to change movies. As we know, The Earth Stood Still used to have a different ending, and the government forced them to change the ending.
What was that? I don't
So
know that story, Steve. How did they change
so
the
the
ending of that movie?
the ending was a more forceful thing where Klaatu took on the American military and basically handed it to them. And they basically said, listen, you're going to do what we say or else.
Oh, okay.
Uh, that's a brief way of putting it.
Yeah, yeah.
And and they didn't want that out there, and I don't think, and I think obviously the robot is one thing. I think the alien also survived, and he didn't die in the way that they made him die, and they came up with this kind of thing. So it's interesting that
But
things change.
but the thing is, Steve, governments can fall apart too in the long run. I mean, I worked in Austria in 1989 at an international research institute, EASA, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and it was a joint East-West venture that
Right.
Brezhnev and Nixon had set up to try to create some area where the Soviet Union and the US could work together. They had this idea the Cold War would end and how we're going to science. We're going to work together on science. Climate science, that's kind of neutral, right?
The same thing that got Kennedy killed to do a joint mission to the moon, right? So good.
Well, in this particular case, I worked with Soviet scientists who were my age, and I was in my 20s back then, and
Right.
East German scientists. These are very smart people, and it was a lot of fun to hear their perspectives on some of the stuff I was interested in. And no one would have thought in '89 that East Germany was going to cease to exist by December of 1989, right? And this is just in June, July, August. So this is for 2, 3 months. Yeah, it's a long stretch there over at Schloss Laxenburg in South Vienna area. And that system ceased to exist because it was so repressive. No one wanted to really be there unless you were like these guys, sort of top of the food chain, and you were in with the good with the Communist Party and you liked your life. But a lot of people really didn't. And as soon as they
Right.
had a chance to go over that wall, Steve, if you'll remember, on
Oh
that
yeah.
summer night in '89, they didn't have enough guards to keep all those people in. They had to let them through because so many people they went and Steve, this is an interesting point. They amassed along the wall, the East Germans that night, because of a rumor from an Italian radio station that was false, that the guards were letting people through to visit their relatives maybe one night out of the year. People heard this and they rushed to the wall, and all of a sudden you had like thousands, tens of thousands of people. I don't know how many it was, and there weren't enough guards to control the situation, and they had to open up the doors, the checkpoints, and that was the end of East Germany. So, you know, anyone who's familiar with any modicum of history would understand this. If you hold back the forces of change too long, eventually it becomes like a flood, like you're putting your finger into the dike and the water is going to explode when you take your finger. This could be slowly happening with this subject. Just in my experience, there's so many people have had some contact with it. I just mentioned at the beginning of the show, just from my high school alone, that I didn't hear about for a long time. So I think there's a kind of momentum effect, and we have to look at the possibility that eventually governments have
Mm.
to change or they can collapse. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen here in the US, but I'm just saying maybe it's not as monolithic as it seems until the day it changes.
Yeah, but in our world, especially when it comes to the executive branch, the world collapses every 4 years, right?
Right.
It either gets renewed or a new president comes in. He does all different things, and obviously, no one foresee Donald Trump being this unicorn that he is, and to come in and get elected. First of all, because no one's ever been elected like him before, and maybe it part of that shows the rebellion of the American people to know the truth about certain things.
I agree with you, Steve. I think that's exactly
Uh,
what it shows. There is some level of frustration with our bureaucratic institutions. I think you see this also with his pick for health secretary, Robert Kennedy Jr.
mhm.
With this suspicion about vaccines and artificial water fluoridation, and a whole bunch of other subjects where people are really questioning the science here, but the government bureaucracies have taken a monolithic approach saying this is the only way that's going to work. We're going to do this to your water, so forth. I'm not saying that in necessarily that anyone totally knows the exact science of all that. It's just that people don't like being told what to do unless you really give them a good reason. And they don't like, after decades of monolithic government policy, not being able to have their input into that. And I think it builds up. And so I think, yeah, in Trump's case, there is this feeling that the system isn't serving people. And we're going to put a maverick in the White House. He's like, if you don't do something about this, we're just going to elect people like Donald Trump to just start literally smashing down some of the buildings. I was in DC not too long ago for this screening of that movie Paranormal Bigfoot: A Flash of Beauty, and I got to walk around the White House and see that demolition of, what was it, the East Wing, is it the ballroom there
Right.
or something?
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, literally taking a sledgehammer to some of the. But I
Well,
think,
you think about the
yeah,
difference. You talk about Kennedy. Kennedy, people think he's crazy. He was a law professor in where I went to law school,
oh, he
and
was,
I've
yeah,
been around him a lot. And I can't say he's not crazy. He started the River Keepers. Agree with it, and I agree with it. Cleaned up the Hudson. Create all these things. He made changes. So I don't think he's crazy. I mean, he may have a different belief than anybody. Some things, like everyone in the world, some things I believe, some things you don't. I mean, I think it's amazing that the Secretary of War or Defense or whatever the heck they call it now has a tattoo of the Knights Templar on his chest. I mean, just the the differences of what he's done is very is I don't know, transparent. It's whatever, whether he knowingly does it, well, people are telling him to do it. I mean, certainly he's had some conversations with the King of England that haven't gone the way he wanted them to go. When he went there, he changed his policies or whatever it is. Whether he got a message from the powers that be, from the king or whatever, things are different. So, I mean, they certainly tried to kill him enough times. Something different is definitely going on with him as president. And I'm not saying, and I know there's a lot of crap, and I'm not saying that's not crap, you know, but being a non-traditional politician and an egomaniac at the same time is an interesting combination.
very interesting and unpredictable things can come out of that.
That's
And
right.
whatever you think about him or his policies all across the board, no one has done this much for UFO disclosure. And he said coming in to office, "It's not my thing." Interview, he said, "It's not my thing. I'm just not into it." But someone around him is telling him he needs to address it. I don't know if it's Marco Rubio or some of his other cabinet,
Right.
but there are people around him who said, "Look, you need some help with the ratings right now." Or maybe historically, this is a good time to bring the subject open. We had the 2017 New York Times article by Leslie Kean and the other authors. Whatever reason, someone there feels like it's time to bring this forward. And it's become his sort of issue because it makes him seem like the maverick challenging the ancient bureaucracy. And he's saying, "I'm with you, the people. I want to know the truth. I'm releasing this." Even though personally he said he wasn't interested in it. And he didn't tell us very much about the New Jersey quote unquote drones like he said he was going to do before he was sworn in 2 Januaries ago. But still, history has its moments and times when no one's in control and things just want to move. And there's enough witnesses, as we've seen, and enough frustration with this issue. I think the people that in Congress that are talking about UFO disclosure, Steve, they're saying even just from the point of how the money is getting spent, it's a big issue because they're
Right.
supposed to be in charge of who spends the money in this country and what programs. They're supposed to know everything. And even these classified programs, I believe it's the so-called Gang of Eight, who have the security clearances to know about every
Right.
program. And they're saying if we don't know about it, then who does? And who's authorizing where the money is spent? So even if you're not interested in the debate of whether these are extraterrestrials or whether they're terrestrial, or let's say it's just like you were saying in the beginning of the show, a lot of government programs that we don't know about. It's an accountability issue that has a ripple effect across all sorts of issues in our
Right.
country of who's accountable, how's the money spent, what sort of secrets are being kept illegally from this political process that the way it's supposed to work. So I think nobody knows where this is going, Steve. It's gonna kinda take its own path. We don't
Mhm.
know what we're gonna be shown, but I do agree with what some of the people said at Contact in the Desert, which is we've got these famous historical cases where there are lots of witnesses, and if you want to be transparent about the UFO, now it's called UAP, subject matter, you have to address these historical cases going all the way back to Roswell at some point. For example, Steve, you remember in the 90s there was an
So
Air Force report
so
about
let's
Ro
just
Yeah,
let's just give a little background to the conference, and then you can go into that story. So you were a speaker at this conference, and what was it called?
it's called Contact in the Desert. It's been going for a number of years, and there used to be another big conference that I went to called the, International UFO Congress. It was held in Laughlin,
Right,
and I went to that starting around 2000. And then there was another good conference run by Ryan Wood and his father, who's passed away recently, Bob Wood. Bob Wood had worked for McDonnell Douglas, as he said, his entire career. He only had one employer his whole life, McDonnell Douglas. And McDonnell Douglas had their own group to reproduce UFO propulsion systems. And Bob said we were tasked to figure out how UFOs worked and see if we could incorporate them into our planes and so forth. Ryan and Bob Wood created what was called the UFO Crash Conference that was held in Vegas starting in 2002. And I got to go to about 6 or 7 of those. And now Contact in the Desert is now the biggest conference. The other two don't exist anymore.
and they were
And
all famous investigators into
yeah,
this
yeah. I mean,
that
you
you
had
were
Jacques
with.
Vallée, you had Paul Hynek, who is J. Allen
Right,
Hynek's son. And in this particular conference at Contact in the Desert, you had all 5 of J. Allen Hynek's kids were there. There was a J. Allen Hynek family panel, and we got to see slides from that era where we grew up, the 60s, 70s, of the family
nice.
slides with with Alan and so forth. Alan, again, for those who don't know, worked for, was an astronomer at Northwestern, got picked by the Air Force to work with them, Project Blue Book, and so forth.
Right.
And so
So
there are a lot of investigators there that you've heard about, and there are more recent people, Tim Gaudelet, the Rear Admiral, who's come forward recently, who says he knows about these classified UFO programs and underwater objects, USOs, as they're called, underwater submerged, unidentified submerged objects, that type of thing. So you have a lot of different people at the conference. Because I'm looking into the science behind some of this and science of paranormal
right.
phenomena overall, they wanted me to talk about that and do a remote viewing workshop as well. But one case that came up, and I think this is something that our government could address right now, since there's a movement towards transparency, just to address these historical cases. We don't just want to see videos taken by our sensor systems in the last 10 years. I mean, we wanna see those too if they're unidentified, Steve, right? If they're
Right.
interesting. We've seen some, and some of the people say some of the ones we heard have a prosaic explanation, like that image of that missile hitting that object over Iraq, and it just keeps moving. I mean, it was called a Hellfire missile, whatever type of missile it was, and the
Right.
object we were told by an expert there who worked, I forgot what her name was, who worked for NGA, that that is definitely a missile hitting a balloon for whatever reason, because there's not a UFO. But we've had government denials of the subject, like was it Richard Weaver for the Air Force in '94? Remember they came out with that report, Roswell case closed?
Right.
So we could have a review of that type of document by some congressional committee. In other words, what has the government told us since the 40s about the subject? And is it something that we can now debunk? Can we debunk these counter explanations as being some sort of very superficial, maybe perhaps a counterintelligence operation like people thought Arrow was, Sean Kirkpatrick and all that? That it really was an attempt to find out what was going on. It was an attempt to find out what the witnesses knew and then cover it up, like we've been saying. So I think you could just look at some of the official government publications like the Condon Committee, like Weaver's report, Roswell case closed, where they came out Stephen said it wasn't a weather balloon. You're right. It was a mogul balloon project, which is equally suspicious given that mogul balloons were just ordinary materials listening for Soviet nuclear tests in
Right.
the 40s and 50s. Yeah, you could go through that and say, if you want transparency, were those real attempts to find out what was going on, or were those just whitewashes? Condon report to saying there's no military significance, it's not worth studying, leave it alone. At the same time, while Condon was putting his report together, you had these missiles going offline in big groups in the northern tier, Strategic Air Command bases. I've spoken to people like that guy Gary that I interviewed, who was a missile security guard at Minot Air Force Base, and he saw a very bright object lifting off by one of the silos. They were burnt. The whole side of the Jeep, he said, was burnt, including their M16s inside the Jeep. They had suffered medical injuries from being exposed to this object. The Air Force attempted to hypnotize them, as they often do. Steve, what I'm saying here, there's a big story here, just in terms of the government's effort to contain what we know about it over the decades. And I would think any transparency effort would include
Right.
looking at what the government has told us since the 40s and trying to determine, was that a sincere, real effort to tell us what could be safely told at the time, or was it just an attempt to push it all back under the rug?
So that's the end of part one. Stay tuned for part two. It should be released later this week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching History's Agenda.